It gets frustrating for me sometimes running this channel and trying to facilitate the discussion around it, which I suppose is to say that it can be frustrating trying to talk about communism and capitalism with US Americans. If you're new to this channel, Socialism for All, as about 5,000 of you are since April 1st this year, you may have been recommended this channel by the YouTube algorithm but haven't done much if any of the readings which are required in order for you to begin to understand and to evaluate historical efforts at ending capitalism and building socialism, the class war that has been going on for the last 200 plus years. This definitely hasn't stopped a lot of you from commenting anyway, and oftentimes in a very arrogant manner, which gets annoying to me quickly as I started this channel to read more and to be a resource to the US left movement, not so much to be a babysitter for stubborn liberals. So until you've done more of the readings, I strongly encourage everyone in the audience to hold your comments and to go to the home tab at the YouTube page, then scroll down just slightly to the recommended readings section and get started. You're always welcome to post a well thought out comment about something you've read, but if you're just going to be pointlessly antagonistic or continue to grip onto your pre-existing biases as hard as you can, you're not going to get much out of it, because this channel is about giving up the false notions about economics and society that you learned in your socialization in the US or a similar country, and learning something new and future-oriented, not clinging to capitalistic assumptions with the death grip of a billionaire overlord. And if that's not something you're interested in, go ahead and move on. So, while this channel is grounded in the audiobooks, which are things of real value produced by people we can learn from, who have actually accomplished things in the world related to the revolutionary struggle against capitalism, rather than just somebody who got popular on Instagram or has an expensive gamer chair, we do also try to keep things fresh by commenting on events in the class war, not just current events as such, but current trends going on over a multi-year period, trying to understand not just what happened today or this week, but the times we live in, with some context and what we can expect in the next few years or decade, and how to get oriented to that in terms of our politics and activism. And no sooner than I'd just done a multi-installment series on the treachery of Bernie Sanders this spring in a playlist called Socialists Against Bernie Sanders, and put extra effort into clarifying my suggestions on organizing in the United States in the 2 videos titled A Tale of Two Comments, How to Move the US Left Forward to Socialism, and more on US left parties, then Zohran Mamdani won the New York City mayoral primary. And a fresh crop of hopeful liberals, people who believe capitalism can go on forever, and social democrats, people who believe we can slowly reform our way out of capitalism, lost their minds over it, prompting a new round of commentaries from me trying to put this in perspective, and not only not have people get caught up in that, but really to see it for what it is, a basically unhelpful effort to rehabilitate the Democratic Party, which is and will forever be, for as long as it exists, an organization of our class enemy, which you will understand better the more you understand Marxism. Mamdani's campaign does not embody any of the strategies I've been advocating on this channel. According to my understanding of Marxism, actually just the opposite. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but right now I'd like to get to the main point of this video, which is that there are 2 types of comments I get a lot, which attack this channel from 2 different, and in my view, incorrect directions, and I want to address and share these with you. There's a lot of tired ground in these that I've addressed dozens of times already, but there is actually at least one new piece that I don't think we've covered that much, which is why I'm making this video, because otherwise, I've pretty much explained the rest of it to my satisfaction. If you want to hear the final explanations of those, again, please see the Socialists Against Bernie Sanders playlist, and also the Tale of Two Comments, and more on US Left Party's videos. And if you have significant additional questions after listening carefully to those, at this point, I'm not really sure I can help, and I think you might just have a mental block on discussing this topic somehow. Anyway, there are 2 pervading notions that I've seen time and again in the comments which I agree with, and I've put them on the screen. The first is that we need to make Marxism more popular and better understood among the US working class. The second is that we should call neither liberalism, the incorrect idea that capitalism is fine and going to function as the way we produce the goods and services that we need for modern life on an indefinite basis as long as we rein in some of its worst excesses. Nor should we call social democracy, which is the incorrect idea that we can gradually reform our way out of capitalism into socialism without a militant revolutionary conflict somewhere along the line with the power-wielding capitalist class, socialism. So we should call neither liberalism nor social democracy socialism. I wholeheartedly endorse both of these statements, which in the context of the ongoing discussion I've been seeing here at the channel, absolutely must be linked together, which is the purpose of this video. So let's get into that. The first statement, we need to make Marxism more popular and better understood among the US working class, is true. This is simply the statement that a major part of our job as communists is advocating for and educating people about the need to fight capitalism and replace it with socialism. There's nothing controversial there. Capitalism's decaying by the minute and sinking further and further into various manifestations of fascism worldwide, offering nothing to humanity from now until the end of its historical existence but economic crisis, environmental crisis, political atrocities, genocide, and war. Particularly compared against the backdrop of what would be possible if we ended it and replaced it with socialism, this is totally unnecessary and unacceptable, and profit-oriented industry is now actually threatening the climatic foundations of the biosphere, of life itself on this planet, so it has to go, and we have much less time in which to do that than may be comfortable to believe. The US is the leading force for the horrors of global capitalism today, and the more we can do to open people's eyes to that, and to undercut political support for it within its own borders, the better. People love talking online about whether there is or isn't revolutionary potential in the US as though this were a static thing, which either exists or does not exist, period. The reality is, it can exist if we create it. We create it by understanding the factors and conditions which limit its development and working to reduce and remove these while working to build up the factors and conditions which increase its chances of happening. My bottom line when it comes to revolution is that people do not generally fight revolutions to hang on to their current standard of living. They fight revolutions because they see them as the only way forward to a much better life and a social order which better fits their material reality. This can be true even if their current standard of living in terms of raw consumption is better than it was in the past, or is better than is found in other parts of the world. No matter the current conditions, if the risk of undertaking a revolution is outweighed by the credible future gains it can provide, the chances of that revolution happening increase. It's our job as communists to increase those chances in every way we can do, and to facilitate the corresponding practical activity as helpfully and constructively as possible. Along those lines, there's a long-standing slogan that sums up that process: agitate, educate, organize. In Marxism, we also refer to it as developing the subjective factor. If the objective factor is the material conditions of life, the subjective factor is people's attitudes about it, their class consciousness. Agitation is the process of listening to people, asking them questions about their life, and helping to draw out and articulate their problems and grievances. Education is the step of helping them to understand the roots of those problems in the class system of capitalism and how addressing that is the way forward. Organizing is the final step, and that's helping the people who have articulated their complaints and demands and have some understanding that capitalism has to go in order for their problems to be resolved and for lasting solutions to be put in place, to band together to overpower the existing organizations of the capitalists, crush every scrap of their old system of exploitation and oppression, and build a new system of and for working people that can run goods and services production on a planned, not-for-profit basis. When it comes to communist organizing specifically, Marxism-Leninism holds that there are specific forms of organizing which are superior to others and which are required to sustain the militant discipline needed in the pre-revolutionary period. Therefore, a communist party which applies these principles is needed. The USA today has no shortage of parties which claim this mantle, as we covered in the 2 recent videos on US left parties, but none of them has made the close ties with the labor movement, which itself is today badly deteriorated, and because basically every kind of effective industrial action was made illegal under the Taft-Hartley Act in the McCarthyist Red Scare period in the late 1940s, probably will need a new, massive round of illegal strike activity to come back to relevance, let alone other facets of the general workers' movement. Therefore, if it were simply a question of identifying the clear and obvious future vanguard party of the US and dumping maximal resources into it, I'd be doing that already. But I don't see such a clear-cut direction for the communist movement in the US, at least not yet. Now, we do cover work from different communist parties and groups from time to time here on the channel so that listeners can check them out, but as I've explained previously, I see it as more beneficial currently to maintain that certain distance. However, it isn't ideal. It's actually born from a lack of something desperately needed, and it will need to change. We need a vanguard party. Not just one that claims to be that, many do that already, but one that incontestably is that. So, I've been strategizing about how best to help that come about, and this is what I've come up with, which also includes having less experienced learning communists or communist-curious people who are doing some amount of study, at least getting some real-world experience with a Big Tent activist hub in their community, even if there isn't an explicitly Marxist group that they see as a positive option for joining. Even without that, there is often at least a nearby DSA or Green Party chapter, for example, and it may be possible to meet other Marxists there and form other projects or caucuses to build on, or hear of other projects through them that you might not have heard of otherwise. Where this ties back into the discussion is that one of the lines of what I consider to be wrong-headed criticism here, and I hate to say that I'm still getting these kind of comments, is from communists who see any involvement whatsoever, even if born out of well-reasoned, practical considerations in these groups, even if simply for the purpose of gaining basic organizational experience, engaging in local networking with other left activists of different stripes, and learning about other local projects, as contrary to communist aims, because, as one lecture I recently received from a patron put it, paraphrasing, DSA and the Green Party exist simply to redistribute the profits of U.S. empire. This is a dogmatic interpretation which ignores the reality of proletarian internationalist and anti-imperialist efforts within these groups. The other main point, to my mind, which relates directly to the statement that we need to make Marxism more popular and better understood among the U.S. working class, is that failing to be working with and within these groups, which are open to us, means refusing an opportunity to be present and visible where a lot of activity, organizing, and discourse are currently taking place. In Marxism, we distinguish between vanguard organizations, which are set up to organize communists, the most class-conscious workers who are dedicated to studying and producing works of political economy and historical materialism, and mass organizations, which are set up to organize the broader workers' movement, which we then roughly categorize into the advanced or most progressive masses, the middle masses, and the backward masses who are most captured by reactionary propaganda. But without a relationship between the vanguard and the masses, the vanguard is disconnected from its historical task of guiding the proletariat to revolution, and the workers are likely to spin their wheels, engaging in endless rounds of relatively fruitless spontaneous rebellions which do not add up to an end to the oppression of their class. As members of the communist-oriented American Party of Labor, commenting on the last video offered, it's their party's policy that their members also stay active in mass organizations, to try to give well-informed advice to the workers' movement and to build that link, to build respect and trust among the workers for the communists. So we shouldn't misunderstand what a DSA or a Green Party is. They aren't communist parties, which no one around this channel has been saying they are ever. But we do need to understand where the activity is happening in the US left and where the potential exists to develop and advance mass activity, to find communist allies and potential future communists among those who want to take the next step in their activism. So we've talked about that a lot. The new piece that we haven't talked about as much in the past, but have been talking about more this year, is the US communist movement and its organizations have been quite far underground and lagging in popularity, let alone the question of if the Marxism-Leninism, in quotes, that they are promoting is in fact Marxism-Leninism, or if it's degraded and revisionist. I agree that we need to help to popularize socialism among the US working class, but the Marxist parties themselves are maybe moving too slowly in that respect. So, I'm in favor of taking additional steps rather than just simply promoting one of these parties, as I was saying before. I'm sure that there's going to be those who will still object to this for one reason or another, but since we've had this discussion about 1,000,000 times now, don't expect a change from me because you typed up and sent me another comment about it. Now on to statement 2. We should not call liberalism or social democracy socialism. This comes directly off of the point I just mentioned, that when working in mass organizations, we should understand that they're not Marxist and that the more communist ideas we can help to normalize in them, the better, but that we're bound to come up against some levels of capitalist ideas in them due to the influence of both the multi-billion-dollar capitalist media machine and also simply the pervasive capitalist influence and bourgeoisifying effect of living in an advanced capitalist country, being taught the norms of that society in so many ways since birth, verbally and non-verbally, directly and indirectly. It takes significant conscious effort to overcome a lot of that and to decolonize our minds, and a lot of newcomers have barely begun that work and will be dragging in all kinds of capitalist conceptions of political success and priorities into their activism and organizations. And even some more experienced people will still have a lot of mental unpacking to do in those respects to re-socialize themselves and each other into a more collectivist, revolutionary proletarian mindset. It can take a lot of time and reflection to do that, and not firmly uprooting it can result in political deviations to the right, typically what we call opportunism, the tailing of capitalist politicians, like Democratic Party politicians, or political deviations of the pseudo-left or ultra-left kind, which stem from a petty bourgeois mentality, and manifest in forms closer to anarchism. But to turn now toward a specific strain of comment that keeps showing up in various forms, which needs criticism, there is this idea that liberal, quote-unquote, fettered capitalism and social democratic politicians such as Bernie, AOC, and Zohran Mamdani are quote-unquote moving the Overton window left, or increasing what is politically possible in people's minds, and also that they are, quote, making people in the US less afraid of socialism. I'll address these 2 points separately and then contrast them with a standard Marxist approach to engagement with the capitalist electoral system, which we did a video on back in the fall, titled Socialism 101 versus Electoralism, Do Communists Vote in Capitalist Elections? So first, I basically reject the idea of the Overton window or, quote, window of political possibilities, which, like the Nolan chart, or Political Compass, the world's smallest political quiz, was invented a few decades ago by a Libertarian Party activist for the purposes of corrupting political discourse with Libertarianism. That is what the Lolberts do. In their quest to deregulate and privatize everything, they try to creep their way into politics by stealth, so that they can advance their pro-capitalism, pro-slavery, we need a free market in human children agenda without people noticing. In other words, what used to be politically unthinkable, due to civil rights struggles in the interest of oppressed and exploited people who won their gains by force with sacrifice, gradually becomes common sense again after the Lolberts, like termites, have chewed their way through the foundations of the new protections. What the Overton idea basically represents is how capitalists gradually restore their preferred values and norms in the context of their overall dominance in society, in other words, under capitalist rule. What we see in Marxism is something else. A long history of struggle between classes with different material interests, the struggle being punctuated by revolutionary shifts as to which class rules the society and wins the right to build a completely new order, which is what we as socialists are after. Long story short, never take a Lolbert at face value. So, is there mind-opening value in Mamdani's free buses, etc.? I think it's negligible. People already want more. Take Medicare for all. Bernie Sanders talked about that for quite a while. AOC started talking about it, then quickly backed off. This is why I say that Bernie picked up the US left, then dropped it on its head. The second idea in need of criticism is that liberals such as Bernie, AOC, and Mamdani are making the US public less afraid of the word socialism. The problem with this is that although they use that word occasionally, they aren't socialists by any meaningful definition of that word as distinct from left liberals or social democrats. This isn't just a, quote, purity test, it's literally, do words have meanings? To quote a 2015 Counterpunch article by Paul Street called Bernie Out of the Closet, Sanders' long-standing deal with the Democrats, which we read in full in a video in the Bernie Sanders playlist called Bernie Sanders and the Lesson of Occupy Wall Street, and which I highly recommend to anyone who doesn't know Bernie's devastatingly traitorous and anti-socialist history. Quote, Sanders does not call for socialism. He does not criticize or even refer to capitalism or the profit system, the underlying political economic regime that is wired for the endless upward distribution of wealth and power and the ruination of livable ecology. Sanders rails against the, quote, billionaire class, against economic inequality, against the Republicans, against Fox News, against the Citizens United decision, and especially against those terrible Koch brothers. He's running as a strident populist Democrat. In that regard, he's not really all that different from Dennis Kucinich in 2003 and 4, Jesse Jackson in the 1980s, and even John Edwards in 2007 and 8, all of whom struck strong populist chords in efforts to reach the Democratic Party's, quote, progressive base, end of quote. And I can already hear now the apologists saying, well, he can't say socialism because then they'll do this or that to him. Well, they already did it and he went along with it, so I don't think that holds water. Socialists talk about socialism and capitalism. Bernie Sanders does not. So, in other words, there is no Overton shift here, even if that were a valid thing, because the quote-unquote shift does not lead anywhere. Socialism will have free buses, but socialism is not when there are free buses. Further, free buses get you no closer to socialism, and will be repealed as soon as the capitalists find it politically expedient to do so, like all the other reforms they sometimes find advantageous or find themselves forced to tolerate while their overall rule in society is intact, a rule which only can be broken by revolution. revolution, which only can be brought about by communist methods of organizing and struggle. Socialism likewise will have a more affordable New York City, but socialism is not when New York City is more affordable. Further, a more affordable New York City isn't possible under capitalism for any sustained length of time due to the capitalists' extensive resources under capitalism, including the capitalist state, to advance their own class interests. And the bigger the dent our demands make in that, and in their profits, the more pushback we can expect from them. The only solution is to take away their overall rule over society, what we call the dictatorship of capital and its institutions. Okay, but what is socialism? And what's capitalism? Socialism is, to quote Rajani Palm Dutt in Fascism and Social Revolution, which is probably the single best anti-fascist book for new socialists, or really anyone to read, and we have it here on the channel, quote, 1. Common ownership of the means of production by the workers constituting the entire society. 2. Production for use, unquote. This is distinct from the current system of capitalism, which is marked by, quote, 1. Production for profit. 2. Class ownership of the means of production. 3. Employment of the dispossessed workers or proletariat for wages, unquote. As Paul Street noted, this distinction, crucial to any definition of socialism, which differentiates it from capitalism tolerating liberalism or social democracy, is simply not mentioned, and socialism itself not called for by Bernie or by the Bernie-imitating Democrats and covertly democratic quote-unquote independents from the right wing of DSA. People talk these days about how the line between a capitalism-tolerating social democrat and an actually socialist but anti-revolutionary, anti-Marxist-Leninist democratic socialist has been blurred, or at least the term democratic socialist has been co-opted by pro-capitalist social democrats. However, democratic socialism is a real thing. It doesn't work for ending capitalism, but it is a real political position. An actual opposition to private capitalist property and the profit system that wants to bring about actual socialism, as defined above, but through a peaceful parliamentary path. At one time, following World War II and the ascension of Khrushchev, the revisionist Communist Party of the Soviet Union even touted the possibility that Marxist-Leninist organizing for revolution to dismantle the capitalist state, well explained by Lenin as an absolute must, was no longer necessary, and that the parliamentary road was now open. However, the Indonesian mass killings of communists in 1965 and 66, and the overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973 quickly put the lie to this. For more on the former, see Vincent Bevan's 2020 book, The Jakarta Method, and for more on Allende, see an audiobook here on the channel called The Tragic Events in Chile by Enver Hoxha. So, does it help in any real way to have people less afraid of the word socialism if the only reason they're less afraid of it is because they have a new, less threatening false definition of it instead of the old, menacing false definition of it? Doesn't that just make more problems for socialists to spend time and effort on down the line when we'll be facing greater crises and we'll have less time to waste on self-made impediments? What if, instead of misleading the people, we help to expose the people who made them afraid of that word socialism in the first place? The murderous capitalist propagandists who are now more and more openly going mask off as the fascists they've long been under the surface. Those efforts are already underway and should be amplified instead of lying to the people about what socialism means and what the struggle for it will demand of them. The latter does not help socialism. It helps capitalism by buying time for social democracy, whose leaders always historically have played both direct and indirect roles in the rise and administration of fascism, as documented in Dutt's Fascism and Social Revolution. Lastly, I mentioned before that Mamdani's campaign does not embody any of the strategies I've been advocating on this channel according to my understanding of Marxism, just the opposite, and I said that I'd contrast them with a standard Marxist approach to engagement with the capitalist electoral system. I've been doing videos on that for about 5 years, going back to the 2020 election, and a particular video I did titled Vosh Invokes Marxist Theory for Joe Biden in New Vote-Shaming Low. To summarize, and most of this goes back to Marx and Engels, when socialists run candidates in capitalist elections, and we say capitalist elections because the state always has a class nature, which is to say that it was created by a particular class to advance that class's interests over the other classes in society. Classes being groups of people sharing a relationship to the means of production or the things used to produce goods and services. When socialists run in capitalist elections, we do certain things to avoid being captured by the capitalist system and ending up serving capitalism instead of weakening it. For example, maintaining an independent workers' party and not tailing the capitalist parties. So Mamdani's already failing there. Running in capitalist elections less to win and more to disrupt and to advertise the party, also to take a head count of supporters at the ballot. Completely boycotting certain elections if there's a chance of winning, and winning means becoming part of an imperialist war government or similar. And if you do win, strictly running a program of disrupting and exposing the capitalist government rather than administrating on behalf of it. Finally, any reforms should be done in service of socialism, meaning aiding the class struggle and paving the way for the system to be torn down, and not helping capitalism run better by covering up contradictions in it, which is what social democracy is all about. As Lenin said in Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder from 1920, there's 3 quotes here. First, participation in bourgeois parliaments is of value to the communists only if it is used as a means of educating the masses and preparing them for revolutionary action. Second, the only reason the communists should participate in bourgeois parliaments is to use this participation as a means to criticize and expose the bourgeois system. Third, the parliamentary struggle is only a secondary form of struggle. The main struggle is the revolutionary struggle of the working class." Unquote. Also, Lenin wrote in The Attitude of the Bourgeois Parties and of the Workers' Parties to the Duma elections about workers' parties forming blocs with capitalist parties, quote, "The advocates of blocs with the Cadets, which was the main capitalist party in Russia, are not only doing harm to the proletariat and to the whole cause of liberty, they are prejudicing the development of political consciousness among the urban and rural poor. They are not performing their immediate duty, which is to free these people from the influence of the liberal bourgeoisie. Look at the Trudovics, the, quote, popular socialists, and the socialist revolutionaries. They too are wavering, and are also mainly occupied with plans for deals with the Cadets. The leaders of the Trudovics, having failed to form a party of their own, are multiplying their Duma mistakes tenfold by appealing to the masses to vote for the Cadets. This is downright treachery in the cause of the peasant struggle, downright betrayal of the peasants to the liberal landlords, who would rob the peasants by means of a, quote, fair compensation as thoroughly as their forefathers did in 1861. And as for the, quote, popular socialists, even the Cadets are laughing at them and calling them second reserve cadets. Their leaders also appeal for blocs with the Cadets. Their tiny party is a mere appendage of the Cadets. It is the great historical duty of the Workers' Party to help to create an independent political party of the working class. Those who advocate blocs with the Cadets hinder the fulfillment of this duty." Unquote. I also highly recommend reading Rosa Luxemburg's Reform or Revolution, which we have here on the channel, and I will link in the video description to all of the mentioned videos, because she goes into detail on all of these relevant topics, whether it's parliamentarism or running in elections, or the nature of reforms under capitalism. And really, if you haven't read that, I highly encourage you to do that. I'll even read it to you. Just click the link in the video description and digest that. Grapple with it before you post your next comment about the Overton window or whatever. Alright, finally, before I sign out, to the silent likers out there who will, by the hundreds, like this video and not make obnoxious comments on it, I see you and thank you. And I'm also calling on you to step up as you feel ready and amplify these messages the best you feel you can. If you can share the videos, that's good. If you can relate these points in your own voice in whatever forums you have or can gain a voice in, that's also good. However you can do it, let's do it. There's a lot of material on this channel, on other channels, and on free sites like Marxist's Internet Archive or Marx to Mao, publishing houses like November 8th or Foreign Languages Press, and others that a lot of us have been studying for years now. And I want to reiterate the call I made in the second Zohran Mamdani video against left complacency and for a new communist vanguard, which is, I think it's time for communists to coalesce and take more of the lead now, because we see where the right wing of DSA, the Bernie Sanders liberals, are going to take us, and it's just leading people in circles inside of the doomsday cult of capitalism. It's blue MAGA light. They talk about authoritarianism and oligarchy as though capitalism can exist without either of those things at this point. That is not helpful to those of us who want to fight against fascism, terminal stage capitalism in decay, and for the only future that can exist, a socialist future.